prices, the debt is going down 10%. So if there's $10 trillion debt, national debt, that goes down to $9 trillion of real purchasing power. So the debt is being liquidated, but that's evil. That's evil because it's punishing the people. And they talk about, the advantages of having a weaker dollar. There are no advantages to anybody to say, well, I have money in the bank, and the government has a policy of deliberately taking the purchasing power away. It's a tax. So debt represents the need to destroy the money because that's how they'll liquidate the debt.
You have consistently voted to lower or abolish federal taxes, spending, and regulation, and used your House seat to actively promote the return of government to its proper constitutional levels. Talk to listeners about excessive taxation and income tax, because you made a comment in a recent interview I thought was fascinating, that eventually, as the dollar fades, that people will just stop sending in their taxes, you suppose, is what you were saying, and that is what happened in Russia, correct?
Yeah, and it happens, in times of war and emergencies. Sending it in doesn't matter because the government doesn't send anything back. If they send it back to you, it has no value. I think it's going to be sort of a de facto nullification. Nullification of federal laws by the states was something debated in our early years, but then it sort of lost the argument. But I think that's what's going to happen. The states might just not secede from the Union literally, but, de facto just quit participating because the federal government will lose credibility. And that can't be all that bad. I also think closely related to this is when governments fail, whether it's the legislative branch or the judicial branch or the executive branch, and the people just keep getting stuck with all these rules and regulations and abuse of our liberties, if the system is still functioning where the court systems are functioning, one of the things that could save us is jury nullification. And I think maybe that'll catch on, too. And that means that juries have a right and an obligation under the early understanding of the judicial system in our history, and that is the juries have a right to judge the law. Today, they are explicitly told that they cannot, and if you bring that up, you're in big trouble. But a jury is supposed to be secret. And if they're in secrecy, say, some of these tax laws and some of these drug laws and some of these economic laws, they're not worthwhile. Why should we put somebody in prison because they obeyed a state law, but the federal government comes in and overrules it on a drug charge? If they had a jury that understood this, they could just never, convict these people. So maybe that will happen too. But more likely, what's going to happen is people will just ignore the system. They'll go into the underground economy. They'll trade services. It won't be a very good time because that's sort of going backwards, where you have to literally go into bartering. But I think it's also an important reason why people ought to, for security reasons, have gold and silver coins in case of an emergency.
There have been rumblings of a secondary police force reportable directly to the president, reminiscent of Nazi Germany's brown shirts or what eventually became the SS. And now longer school hours are being discussed so the state can more effectively take control of raising the nation's children, as opposed to parents reminiscent of Nazi Germany's Hitler Youth training. How can the people of the United States stop this police state from engulfing them?
They first have to wake up, and a lot of people are, but a lot of people like to be taken care of. You can look at the example of how this inoculation program is going for H1N1. One group of people are screaming and hollering, "Don't round me up and don't force me to take a shot. I don't want one and you don't have a right to force me." In another breath, there are lines and begging and pleading, "Give me the shot, give me the shot." They've scared them to death, and they'll wait for these in long lines for a shot that I think is questionable. And so it's sort of a contest between the ones that want to be taken care of and will be obedient to everything the government tells them versus the people who would like to make up their own decisions. But it'll be easier for the side that wants to make their own decision to win this when the government becomes so ineffective that people don't have any trust in the government anymore.
Let me ask you about a comment that Charlie Munger made, Buffett's partner over Berkshire Hathaway. He talked about the need to remove basically the banking and Wall Street crowd from running our government and said these people need surgery performed to remove them, but they do not want surgery, but that it would be better for the wider civilization if they were removed. Will they be removed from our government, Congressman Paul?
You mean the banking cartel that might control our government?
Yes.
Well, you'd have to remove the system. That's why the system of government is so important. That's why we have to decide what the role of government ought to be. As long as you have a Federal Reserve System and big government collecting a lot of taxing and passing out revenues, you're always going to have people vying for control. And some of it will be out of self-defense. They'll say, oh, yeah, they take all our money. I'm going to Washington. I'm going to try to get some back to build highways in my state, too, because they're taking it. Why just sit back and let somebody else have it? But that'll continue. But I think the basic question is that we probably need a whole generation to ask the question, what should the role of government be?
When you look at the dollar debasement and the massive debt the country has, and we keep expanding the balance sheet from the Federal Reserve, do you look at the dollar and say there's no real will in Congress to stop this, so you just see a collapse? Is that what you're really saying when I see you interviewed?
There's no moral restraint. There's no resistance by conservatives or liberals because they want spending for different reasons. So if we had only constitutionalists here, even with its shortcomings, if they only did what Article 1, Section 8 permitted them to do, we wouldn't have this problem. So it's a matter of having a different group of people in Washington. But if the people think that they can keep voting themselves largesse and all these benefits, that's who will come to Washington, and hopefully that will shift. But right now, Washington is filled with people who, obediently try to participate in this game. It's just very difficult to say that we're going to end this real quick.
You're so much more in touch with this than our listeners because you're there in Washington. But do you see already some bills that have passed that have started the beginnings of what could be capital controls? Because if you have a currency implode or over time greatly devalue, you end up many times with capital controls. Do you see that happening or signs of that starting to happen?
It always does. Governments, when they get into so much trouble, and right now, I think there's signs that less dollars are coming into this country for investments. Our money is flowing the other direction. So if we start sending our capital out, there'll be controls. They inevitably do it. And I imagine with all the emergency legislation that's been passed over the years, they could use almost anything they want, whether it's national security or even these financial emergency powers that have been given. And even if they didn't have it, they're going to do it. They just have to scare the people, and then they worry about it later on, whether they're doing it correctly or not. But I definitely think that at the rate we're going, we will see financial controls, which will only compound our problems.
Do you have any idea of a time frame on that, or is it just too early to tell?
No, I wouldn't be able to say. I don't think it's obviously going to happen this year. But things can shift rather quickly. Right now, the circulation of money is rather slow, and if that would change and people started getting rid of their dollars and having buy stuff instead of just parking dollars, that could shift rather quickly. And, in a year or two, it's possible.
You are such a student of history, Congressman Paul. Does the U.S. remind you of the latter stages or near the end of an empire where it is being looted? Is the country being looted?
Well, the people certainly have been looted, and the transition in a time when the money is systematically debased, but you don't have runaway inflation, actually the middle class gets poorer and the wealthy class gets wealthier, and we certainly can see that. I think we shifted gears in the year 2000. Most people say the crash really came in, and the crisis came in 2008, but I think it really started with the NASDAQ bubble. It's been going on for a while because standard of living has been going down. There's been no real new jobs, and the shift has been away from the average middle class because Wall Street, even during that time, and even on the bailout, the special privilege were able to get bailed out. So this generally is what happens, is the people on the inside get the benefits, and the middle class and the poor suffer.
You mentioned the poverty right now, and the United States has been purposefully deindustrialized, I think, as part of the move towards global governance. We already have tent cities across America, and they are growing in size, and poverty is spreading in this country as the elites consolidate their power and wealth and plan to merge America into a global government and remove its sovereignty. Someone like you, Congressman Paul, you never vote for legislation unless the proposed measure is expressly authorized by the Constitution. You give the people hope that the elites plan to destroy America and its freedoms can be stopped. What chance do we have at this late hour, Congressman Paul?
That's a tough one. I guess if I thought there was zero chance, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't be doing this. And